discipleship has several parts. You jump in at the invitation, you help out when you can, you go deeper, or you reach out. And the one I'm going to focus on today is, might not be what you think it is. It's going to be jumping in, because I'm going to be talking about the Big Ten, the 10 Commandments. And a lot of people think of those 10 Commandments as a way of going deeper, but it's really it's a starting point for a lot of people. And I want you to reflect on this invitation to join in the life that God is now living, and we're going to do it by looking at the setting of this 10 Commandments. It starts in the book of Exodus. It begins with the life of Moses. And I'm going to tell you some things you may have read before, or at least seen on a cartoon, you know, of the Prince of Egypt or whatever. You know, you may have been a little familiar with it. Moses was gifted in many ways, and he was spared a death sentence at his birth by the clever designs of both his mother and his older sister, Miriam. He was 3 months old when he was placed into a kind of a raft in the reeds near where royalty went every day to bathe. And once they found him, his sister pops up and says, "Hey, do you want me to find someone who can nurse the baby?" And it's like, yeah, that's a really good idea. And so, believe it or not, his mother gets paid to raise her son. He later grows up to live in a palace and is given every privilege that wealth and education can provide. He gets the best of both worlds, the Hebrew world of faith and then the Egyptian palace. Well, around the age of 40, Moses is visiting his roots, goes back to see where the Egyptians are kind of like taking advantage of the Hebrew people, and he sees an Egyptian beating on a slave, and he comes to his defense. And in his defense, he ends up killing the man. So he hurriedly buries the body, looks around, makes sure nobody saw what happened. But he wasn't unseen. His plan to aid his fellow Hebrews was met with cynicism after all. Is he really all there to help? I mean, is he willing to abandon his life as a prince to come and take care of the Hebrews? No. And so Moses is on the run to the desert, where for the next 40 years of his life he's spent caring for sheep and living in exile. So you got the first 40 in the palace, the next 40 in the pasture. Moses is now an 80-year-old man. And he encounters here a strange sight indeed. He sees a bush that is on fire. I think I'll go check that out. It's on fire, but it's not burning up. That's the weird thing. He'd seen bushes on fire before, but not like this. And he has an angelic encounter. The angel of the Lord meets him there and says, "Take off your shoes." And Moses is never the same after this encounter with God. It's not unusual for people to have an encounter with God that just changes everything. He's told to go to a place where God lives, so to speak. There's no agreement today as to where that location is. When we go to Israel, we don't really know we're going to the same mountain that he talked about. There's one place that's called Mount Horeb. Other times it's known as the Mountain of God or Mount Sinai. But it's at this mountain that an 80-year-old Moses gets the dream of a lifetime, to be able to deliver his people from bondage. Now, we skip past some of the excuses he makes and his understandable reluctance to go back to the place that was trying to kill him. And I want to look at, for just a brief moment, at the similarity between delivery and deliverance. How many of you have been involved in delivery of some sort or another? Anybody? How many of you have had a baby? That's delivery, right? Well, a pregnant woman about to deliver will experience a blend of deliverance and bondage. Hear me now. You get this new beginning, the freedom from, morning sickness and the discomfort and everything like that. Gone are those days of morning sickness, and ushered in are the groundhog days of routine, of diapers and feeding and cleaning and coaxing sleep while you're so exhausted you can hardly stay awake. One battle is over and another one just begins. Well, getting Israel out of Egypt, this delivery, is one thing. Getting Egypt out of Israel is a whole other thing entirely. Weaning Egypt out of them, the 40 years of the milk of childhood, of the security that Egypt provides, and her gods of Egypt. God planned to forge a nation out of these 12 clans that have been scarred by sibling rivalry for 400 years. Now think about this. It's like the Hatfields and the McCoys, kind of living close enough together to have problems with each other. And now God is going to use the wilderness, the desolation of the wilderness, and a few ground rules to get them started. So before meeting God on the mountain, Moses had to get Israel out of town. To do that, God had to demonstrate not only to Egypt, but also to Israel itself, that he is totally supreme over all the gods that are out there. No regional God here. Yahweh is God of all. He's supreme over all the gods of Egypt. Now, it's commonly believed back then that gods lived up on the mountaintops. So when Moses asked his people to have a 3-day journey to go and worship God, it wasn't to get a 3-day head start into the wilderness so that Egypt couldn't catch up with them. It was because that's how far it would take to get to the mountain where he was going to bring them. But this idea of God living on the mountaintop gets transformed entirely too, because Moses eventually has them build a tabernacle. And in the tabernacle there was something called the Ark of the Covenant. And even if you haven't read that in the Bible, you probably have seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, and you see that imagery of it, and that's the place where God was, in their mind, going to live. So that every place that they would go, can imagine this, every place they would carry this ark would be holy ground, not just at the foot of the mountain. And Moses was told to take off his sandals at the beginning as a sign of respect for that sacred space. Now that sacred space was going to be traveling with them. So the 10 Commandments are delivered at the foot of this mountain where God and Moses had their first date. And it's considered a sacred space, and the purpose of each command is to try to keep the people from violating the sacred space. To give you an idea of what that might be like, imagine your house is all set up for a very special dinner. And you come in, your child coming in, it's going to be a special dinner, all the nice silverware and everything's out there, and the plates, and it's all set up nice. And you come in from playing outside, and your hands are filthy. What's mom going to say? Go wash. You can't come in here like that. You go wash your hands. Go into the bath and use soap this time, right? She's going to give you some directions, like you can't bring that in here. And that's the same kind of thing that was going on here. And so what we will find is that God establishes something called a covenant. In Hebrew, the word is barit. And now barit is a binding contract or agreement. Now there are many different kinds of covenants. For example, some are personal, like when Jacob and Laban, we talked about Jacob a little earlier, when Jacob and Laban make an agreement, it's a family covenant. In Malachi, when he talks about the covenant of marriage, it's between a man and a wife. In Jeremiah, he talks about a covenant about setting your slaves free. When you do that, don't take them back. Don't change your mind. Now, there's some things that covenants did and some that they couldn't do. A covenant in the Bible never tried to restructure society entirely, but instead changed how the people lived and thought in the structures that were already around. There's no effort, for example, here to change it from a patriarchal society where the man's the head of the household into one that's more equal-minded with men and women in charge. There's no attempt to abolish slavery, which we would think this would be a good time to do that, right? Save all kinds of centuries of hassle, but they didn't do that. It was not to endorse clan solidarity over individualism. No, the covenants were to try to transform people so that the society that they live in will be better. You get a good idea of what kind of society people lived in by reading the book of Leviticus or by reading the 20th chapter of Exodus, where they talk about the kind of laws that there are. But there is no ideal society or perfect society proposed anywhere in Scripture. Now, people may say, well, what about Acts 2 or some other things? There's no one set thing like everybody become like this. Ancient Israelites lived so much like their neighbors that the Bible had to go and take intervention and steps to get them away from that, to help them preserve the sanctity of this sacred space. And so in the book of Exodus, starting with chapter 20, we hear something called the Mosaic Law. You may have heard of it. Here's how to live when you don't have a Pharaoh ruling over you. When you don't have a king enforcing the laws. Here's how you live. And life will be sorted out by two big ideas. Loving God and loving others. It's interesting. Those are the same two big ideas that Jesus used in the New Testament. I'm going to read it to you from Exodus 20. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of their parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations for those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord your God will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day it's a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Now these 4 rules are the rules about how do you love God. The next ones, I'll talk about how do you love people. Honor your father and mother so you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Kind of sounds like a threat, like if you don't love your dad and mom, somebody's going to kill you. I don't know. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female servant or his ox or donkey or anything that belongs to your neighbor. You might look at these and say, yeah, I'm doing pretty good at those things. Murder? Nope, haven't done that. I kind of gave up stealing back in the elementary school days. Whatever it is, you think you're doing pretty good. But the thing is that because God is now being seen as a portable God, we're going to take him with us in this Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of him. Everywhere we go, we've got to keep our act clean. The no other gods before me is not declaring, as some people think, that there's only one God in the world. He's not declaring monotheism, even though that becomes a reality over time. He's just saying, there are no other gods in my presence. I don't need an audience. I don't need a bunch of other people to confer with things. Making no image, you see, ancient people made images of their gods so that they could have a portable deity, and they would keep them in their home as protection, sort of like a rabbit's foot, which may be protection for you, but it wasn't much protection for the rabbit. In the temples, they would take the essence of, or the power of that god, put it in an idol in their minds, and put it in their temple. And they used them to exact vengeance on others. They would actually curse people in the name of the idol that they had in their home. And they would care for this deity, and they would bring food offerings. And in return, they would expect that deity would give them favors. See, the issue here is not so much about the image as that worldview. There is no way that this works with Yahweh. This is not how he revealed himself. And then when he says, don't misuse the name, misusing the name was especially in an effort that people used to exploit God's name by using it for a magical spell or a hex. And they would say things, it would be comparable today to identity theft. If someone steals your identity, they can charge up bills, and they can extort money from you. They can do all kinds of things that are harmful to you. Well, they were saying you can't misuse God's name because that's a way of extorting God, of stealing his identity, because then you're thinking you can proclaim things in God's name. And people used to do that. They used to put curses on people that way. Now, the Jews eventually came to the idea that, well, if we're not allowed to misuse his name, let's not say it at all. And so they stopped saying the name Yahweh. And instead they would say Adonai, or Lord, or master or Hashem, which literally means the name, so that by avoiding the name, they would prevent themselves from misusing the name. And then keeping the Sabbath was a reminder that when are you most happy? If you are people that had to work 7 days a week, every day of the week, making bricks, and then God says, I'm giving you a day off, that would be a happy day. That'd be a happy day. You see, the Jews didn't keep the Sabbath. The Sabbath kept the Jews. This is a very important concept that we have got to rediscover somehow. Our calendars and our day timers are so full and so busy that we are weary as can be. And maybe it is a good thing that so many events are being canceled right now, so that people can take restock and reset their lives and say, you know what? I don't really need to go to all these places every single day of the week in order to have a full and happy life. In fact, going to all of them wasn't making my life full or happy anyway. By the time of Jesus, though, it had all gone sideways. They were inventing rules and loopholes galore, and what God had dreamed of was giving them a wonderful life of memories, 1 day a week. They had turned into rules. Now, the next 6 rules are all about living in harmony with one another, learning how to get along with other people. There was only one that was in the positive form: honor your father and your mother. And that was primarily Social Security. They had no Social Security back then. And people were expected to work until they couldn't. And when they couldn't, they needed to depend on their family to take care of them. You know, the New Testament says that if we don't take care of our parents, we're worse than a pagan. The other ones are negative. Don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't bear false witness, don't covet. Now, are these laws still in effect? Do they still belong on our courthouse walls or plaques on walls? Well, there's a good clue for that in the teachings of Jesus. In fact, to many of these laws, he would say, you have heard it said, you shall not kill. And then what follows is a phrase, but I say to you. In other words, the covenant that Jesus makes with us tops or supersedes this one. It would be good for you to read the New Testament carefully to see how the New Testament is a new and better version of the words that were given us in the Old Testament. It's sort of like a firmware upgrade. You know, it's built in and it's supposed to help you out. This new law that God proposes to write in our hearts is not the Mosaic Law. Jeremiah talked about it, Ezekiel talked about it in chapter 36. He says, I will take you out of the nations. I'll gather you from all the countries, bring you back to your own land, and I will sprinkle you with clean water. I will make you clean, and I will cleanse you from all your impurities and from all your idols, and I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. And I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep all my laws. And then you will live in this land I gave to your ancestors, and you will be my people, and I will be your God, and I will save you from all your what? Uncleanness. Remember I said to approach God, to be in God's presence was an act of getting clean. You know, if you came to my house and I got out an old picture album of growing up days, and I started showing you pictures of my mom and just telling stories about her and all the fun we had, wouldn't it seem strange if she were to walk in the front door and I failed to put the album away? You know, I just kept on pouring over these pictures as if she wasn't even there. You know, the easiest thing to do with laws and commandments is to forget why they were given, to miss out on the pleasure that they were intended to allow. And that's why God says, I need to give you a new heart. Your old heart is so easy to forget the joy that I've been giving you. Nearly 1,500 years later, Jesus makes his own wilderness journey. It's a journey of 40 days, one of hunger and thirst, a day for every year that the Israelites wandered in the disobedience in the desert. Here he was tempted to take some shortcuts that would actually turn him against God, to trust in his own strength or his own power. Turn these stones into bread. Accept some ill-gotten kingdom through backroom deals, and gain notoriety by appealing to the masses with mystery and miracles. But Jesus flatly refused all of those temptations. Whereas Israel failed every step of the way, Jesus triumphed. And in Jesus Christ, Israel was reborn. The covenant described in Exodus chapters 20 to 23 was no doubt familiar to the people of Israel. They have a phrase for it. It's called a suzerain treaty or a vassal treaty. Technical words that maybe mean more if you think about medieval times. If you remember the word vassal, these were people who owed their allegiance to a king. And the treaty goes something like this. I will give you protection. You will give me X, Y, and Z. You'll give me food. You'll give me labor. You'll give me different things. This is the deal that we have. Now, that's exactly the kind of treaty that is laid out in this covenant, with one exception. And it's an important exception, important difference that we cannot ignore. In this contract, both parties were supposed to benefit greatly from the arrangement. But there is no benefit visible to God. What does he gain? He gains nothing. What does Israel gain? They gain everything. A promised land, a place to live. I mean, it's just everything. There is no treaty from ancient Near East that is a precise match for this biblical covenant in Sinai. There is no evidence of an agreement between a deity and the people group in these kinds of terms. So what is going on here? What is God trying to do that had never been done before? And why would the relationship that he's trying to offer them take the form of a covenant in the first place? Perhaps the only logical reason is that the people of Israel were familiar with this kind of a treaty. And so God spoke to them in language they could understand. And then he invited them to go on a walk with him. Go on a journey with me to the land of your dreams. The path starts with jump in. For the Israelites, there was a baptism of sorts. Do you remember what that was like? I'm going to take you right through the Red Sea. Oh, we can't go there. We'll drown. So God parts the water and leads them through. How about you? In fact, I wonder, have you ever thought seriously about starting that path with God, of offering your life? Step one, I will identify with Jesus Christ so completely in baptism. COVID has reminded us that we all have an expiration date. Has it not? We all have an expiration date. And some people have been forced to think about that expiration date, and it's scared them. Other people have just absolute peace. You ever wonder why? I know that for people who have life in Christ, the worst thing that can happen to them is not death. That's like the ticket home. All the things and precautions that we're taking right now, we will not know so much how well these precautions will benefit or not benefit or have impact at all. It reminds me of a Bert and Ernie sketch from Sesame Street. Remember the one? He's got a banana in his ear. And is it Ernie had the banana in his ear? Yeah. I think Bert goes, "What do you got a banana in your ear?" And he can't hear him. "Why is there a banana in your ear?" "I can't hear you. I got a banana in my ear." "Well, take that out. You won't. Why do you have a banana in your ear?" And he goes, it's to keep the alligators off of Sesame Street. And he says, There are no alligators on Sesame Street. See how good it's working? Now, let me tell you about something that will work. Absolutely will work. God will work. You might have spent a lifetime worrying and fretting about one thing or another, but there is a life of heaven offered to you to experience right here on earth. Remember the Lord's Prayer says, your kingdom come, your will be done where? On earth. Like how? Like it's done in heaven. He proposes to give us that promised land right now. And so when you talk to people or meet with people who seem maybe a little bit more distressed than they ought to, I'm not talking about the people who are taking precautions. That's not the case. I'm talking about the people who are like in panic mode and they're fearful. Talk to them about the reason why you have this confidence in God. Use this as a time. In fact, I'm praying that God will bring a revival at this time. That people will look at the situation around and say, you know what? If I'm not right with God, maybe I need to get right with God right now. Use this as an occasion to share the good news. I'm going to ask the ushers who are going to receive the offering to come on up now and put in your prayer requests or your offerings. And while that's going on, go ahead and take a look at the bottom of your bulletin. There are 4 questions to consider for going deeper. One of the things that we can all be careful to do in the upcoming days and weeks, knowing that everybody has their own beliefs and feelings about how to respond to the health issue in front of us. If you are one who is incredibly worried or concerned, I just ask you to seek God's peace. If you're one who is not incredibly worried or concerned, I ask you to be respectful of others. Make sure that nobody feels like you don't care or value about them because of the way that you're responding. And the best way to do that is to shower them with the love and grace of Christ. Let's close with a prayer. Father God, we know that you have all these things under control. None of this came as a surprise or a shock. And that you have prepared and planned a way for us. And I pray that somehow out of this challenge will come salvation in the lives of many. I thank you for all the work that you are doing in the lives of our people. And I praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So what we need will be all the chairs stacked up and no higher than maybe 5, and we put it on the perimeter of the building.